Hi, this is János, it's Reverb Audio, and I'm continuing my thoughts, sharing my thoughts about measurement, amplifier, distortion, and error correction. And I recently had a comment where the commenter shared that there are several types of error correction. One is the local feedback and the global feedback. And yes, thank you for making that distinction. Indeed, when you have a local feedback, local error correction, that happens through a single device, then it has relatively less impacts on the sound, very benign in comparison to a global feedback loop or a feedback loop that affects more than one device. So if it doesn't have to be entirely global, it can be just affecting the previous stage. And already we are introducing timing errors with that and having problems that erode the low-level detail level. So essentially, when you just have like a local feedback within your same device, that's not so bad. But I've noticed that even that can impact on the sound quality and take away from the dynamics that you experience. Of course, the benefits will be with increased frequency range, the ability to drive a more diverse variety of loudspeakers, and under that I mean less efficient loudspeakers, the ones that demand a more sort of a straight-jacketed approach to drive them, versus those loudspeaker designs which are easier to drive. And let's now have a look at the loudspeaker side, because loudspeaker development, how loudspeakers changed from the early era of stereo through modern speakers, that had the biggest impact of why we needed to add error correction to the mix, and severe error correction, which included more than just a local degenerative feedback, but like involving several stages or going global, or in the case of the 99+% of commercial solid state amplifiers, multiple global feedback and local feedback loops. You can have like a dozen feedback loops in a solid state amplifier, and that's just plain average. So why did that happen? One of the, I would say, what is more known in the media and when you look into this issue is that the ability to record and the need to reproduce the frequency extremes, more and more of the frequency extremes, that was the major driver, because naturally the frequency response, as you go towards the push the frequency extremes, it falls off, and the amplifier will be just dropping off at the frequency extremes for the performance. And when you look at the early tube amplifiers, like up to the 40s, then you notice that the recorded music material, or the material on the radio that you heard, was basically limited from 60 hertz to 16 kilohertz, and that was already like pushing the recording limits. And then in the 50s, that's when we started to experience like a major increase in the extremes, pushing it like down to 20 hertz and up to 20 kilohertz, or even beyond, or 20 hertz and even lower. And when we have that kind of situation, then of course we needed to have more extreme loudspeaker technology to accommodate for those frequency extremes as well. And the way it can be done in a commercial setting is to decrease the efficiency, the sensitivity of the loudspeaker to be able to reproduce that wide band in a commercially viable setting. Because of course you can reproduce 20 Hz to 20 kHz with 105 dB efficiency, or I would say sensitivity, because efficiency wise that would be in percentages, but that would be like a giant loudspeaker, and then the cost would be like a down payment, or more like buying a home in today's world, like buying a house, buying a studio would be the price of a loudspeaker that's 105 dB sensitive and can reproduce 100 Hz to 100 kilohertz and be easy to drive. And so what was happening is that as the speaker started to become smaller and smaller, and when we are shrinking the size of a loudspeaker, it also translates into making them much harder to drive. And also introducing that problem, I think this is just my thoughts, my observation. You might read different observations from different people, but my observation is that the biggest difference I noticed between the high sensitivity, easy to drive speakers and the low sensitivity, hard to drive speakers is the cone excursion. When you have next to no cone excursion, like with my voice of installed speakers at home, even if I push them like extremely loud and I have subsonic material on it, and the volume is such that I think the wall is going to fall apart, I can see the faintest tremors on the Altec woofer. It's almost, I cannot even see it. I have to touch it with my finger to feel it vibrating. And when I go for a lower efficiency, lower sensitivity current loudspeaker, I don't even need to push the volume very high. You can already see the woofer working out like, like Magic Johnson, like during one of his practice sessions. So I think that's the big problem. And why is it a big problem? Because when you have a bigger cone excursion, it also creates turbulence in the air, because when you have sound pressure, even when it's really loud volume of sound, then the air doesn't travel at very high speed. At your ear, what you have, there's no vast air movement, no huge displacement of air. It's something relatively gentle, even though it's really loud. But what is important, that if it is something like that at the source of your speakers, at the cones, it is gentle, just like at your eardrums, then we have the ability to transmit those vibrations in a coherent manner through the air. Then you have a loudspeaker cone that is moving this huge movement, so it moves like 10 millimeters or 15 millimeters to create a few micrometers of movement that reach your ears. There's a massive disconnect between these two, so that those giant cone movements have to somehow slow down, fall apart, degrade, or into deteriorate into these micro movements by the time they reach your ear. And I think that conversion between the high speed big movement to the low speed tiny resonance at your eardrums, I think that's where a lot of the compromise comes through. And of course, I also had comments recently about the Doppler effect, about the loudspeaker's cone's distortion, that when your cone makes a big movement, so let's say you have let's say a 100 hertz note that is just moving the cone a lot, and then there's like a 600 hertz quieter note, then that 600 hertz note will be modulated by that very large 100 hertz background. And I think this Doppler effect is just absolutely massive and screwing the low sensitivity, low efficiency loudspeakers really badly. And of course, the worst problem with the Doppler is in the mid-range and high frequencies. In the mid-range, because in the mid-range, that's where your hearing is the most sensitive. And in the high frequencies, because we use the high frequencies for 3D imaging. And that's why I believe now current designs where you have these compact loudspeakers, they have this spectacular but super fake sounding 3D image, and that's because all of that Doppler added there, it creates that hyper feel of fake imagery that's not natural, not normal. And you don't even have to enter the room to tell that what you hear is artificial, it's not natural. It's for every modern equipment you can tell that that's not real people playing music in that room. It's being played through an audiophile equipment. It just has that strict character to it, and I think that's part of it. That this added Doppler, and of course, when you look at talks on the Doppler, people almost always say that Doppler is exclusively the problem of single driver speakers. No, it's the problem of every single driver or sound producing material that produces more than one frequency at a time. If it produces more than one frequency, the second frequency is going to have the Doppler on it, but produced by the first frequency. And yes, these people are correct when they say that this problem is potentially the worst with single driver speakers, because there the Doppler is applies to every frequency, but eventually this problem is a problem for every single loudspeaker type, and the bigger the cone movement is, the bigger this problem is. So essentially, if you have a single driver speaker and your cone movement is minimal, then you have less problem with this Doppler intermodulation effect than with a multi-driver speaker where you have huge cone excursion for each of these frequencies. So basically what I noticed and what I experienced is that this change of shrinking down the cabinet sizes and making the speakers much harder to drive and causing these type of distortions created by the vast cone movements, which also mean there's much more acoustic feedback coming from these modern cabinets than from the old super efficient, super sensitive cabinets, then that driving them is just drastically different than driving those super efficient speakers. And introducing error correction into the speakers, drastically driving up, increasing the damping factor of the amplifier is the way to minimize the nasties that these speakers produce by this technology that is required for this compactness. However, what happens with that is that when you have this massive error correction in an amplifier, the super high damping factor for your amplifier, when you add a super efficient loudspeaker to it, it doesn't sound good. They don't work together. And so I think that's one issue that I've noticed, is basically the shrinkage of the loudspeakers. It brought together the need for massive error correction, and eventually that in one way that has been beneficial, and beneficial because all of us have access to audio this way. Otherwise it would be still very limited access, because the only way most of us can buy speakers and amplifiers is that they are compact. If you have like a voice of the theater cabinets, then when they were made for the theaters, not for the people. Only the theaters could house them. And today also those few people who have the endurance and the steadfastness to put these big speakers in their homes, they can also enjoy them in their homes, but it requires a lot of sacrifice from your part and dedication. And for most people it's not happening. And I think the biggest part of it, why it's not happening today, is because the population is getting poorer and poorer. Middle class today can afford only much smaller size speakers than the middle class could afford 50 years ago. And yes, we have more capacity otherwise, and everyone is, you know, really busy with their phones, acquiring stuff like that. But if you want to get bigger speakers, I think it's harder to get bigger speakers today, harder to afford them than it was 50 years ago. So now I'm not even sure where I am going. Now I have I made these slides, but let's see. It's been like a week ago when I made this presentation. I have no clue what I did back then. I'm just really burned out at work. So let's see. Going back there, so error correction applies to both tubes and solid states. The observation, yes. So basically, when you apply more global error correction, either to tube or solid state architectures, then you will have the ability to drive smaller and smaller speakers. And I would not just say drive them, but to be able to reproduce the frequency extremes with these speakers. Because even when you don't have any error correction, you have an amplifier like a tube amp that doesn't use any error correction. Like this little darling amp behind me. I can hook it up to a compact modern speaker like the Ryan 610, and it makes absolutely beautiful sound. And its mid-range is 1 trillion times better than any solid-state amp produces mid-range with that loudspeaker. So I would say, even in today's world, if you have a pure tube amplifier, only 2 stages, no global feedback, nothing, no local feedback, nothing, just those 2 stages, The mid-range will be absolutely stellar, absolutely fantastic, much better than the solid state amp. I would say even the detail level you get in the mid-range is still much better. However, with the solid state you will get a lot more bass, especially mid-bass. I would say not even the quality better, just the quantity, much more quantity, much more deeper, and yeah. But how the bass feels, that somehow it feels wrong to me. It feels artificial, fake, and forced. So when I compare, I go back and forth with the same compact modern speaker designed for today's amplification. When I hit it with a solid state amplifier, it feels like, oh, I got more power, more bass, I can crank up the volume, everything, oh, it's so good. And then I switch back again to this flea power tube amplifier, and I go, oh shit, I just want to toss that solid state amp to the trash heap, because now I hear the music. I'm not listening to the equipment anymore. Yeah, I don't hear that overblown, bloated bass anymore, because yeah, it's under control and everything, but when you compare it with the pure tube amp, then I notice, maybe not you, but to me, my hearing, it is evident that what the transistor amp does is artificial bass. Yeah, it's under control, very extended, but fake, really fake. And I think that's why everyone needs their own audio journey, for you to experience these things with yourselves, do these comparisons for yourself. Also, what music material you're listening to, because if you want to listen to Nirvana and just rock it, or something like that, of course you want to keep the solid state amplifier. But maybe you went through your early teenage years, your hormones are quieting down, you don't have overbearing aggression in you anymore, and you just want to enjoy the beauty in things, and then you can listen to Nirvana without that kind of necessity. But maybe you will start to more get into just finding the beauty in music, and when you do that with a pure, or I would say like a feedbackless, straight path, simple tube architecture, or even I would say like a simple solid state architecture, which exists, but it's very rare. Like Jean Hiraga has such a solid state amplifier, which is a simple approach. It's like almost like going to tube technology, but building it with the transistors. It can also reproduce similar beauty. And Nelson Pasti's Amp Camp is also a similar, simple approach, very cheap, doable, and it is something where when these were made, the people who designed them did not design them with the idea to generate something that measures extremely well. The idea was to generate something that has the least amount of straight jacketing on how the amplifier makes the sound, and it will work the best when your loudspeaker also requires just a normal way to drive them, and not a straight jacketed way to drive them, and that's it. I think that's for today. That's what I wanted to share. And okay, so here I'm just reading now what I put here on this slide, is that basically when we have this massive error correction, global error correction, multiple loops then this gives us the ability for extended dynamic range, extended frequency range, which also limits the dynamic range. It will create, I did this experience, so the more global feedback you have, I added to an amplifier, the dynamic range was shrinking, with the frequency extension appearing to getting extended. And this created an illusion of increased power delivery. So when your dynamic range shrinks, then you think that you are getting more power, but it will be at a cost, that the power will be at the frequency extremes, and it will be tethered more and more to a fixed listening volume. And that's why I think today most amplifiers and amplifier speaker combos work best only at a single fixed volume, because of this phenomenon that if you go any quieter than that, it doesn't have that power anymore. The power is gone. And that's because the dynamic range capability of that unit is limited by the feedback loops in it. And if you want to go louder than that, it already bothers your hearing. It's not good, it's fatiguing, it's just too much. You feel that it's shouting. And so that's the cost that we observe for these increased feedback loops and high level of error correction in our amplifiers. But the benefit is that it's compact, it's cheap, and compact and cheap on the loudspeaker side as well. So if you need this compromise, that you must have a small and affordable, and or affordable and small, it could be small and very expensive, but it has to be small, then you will be more and more just attached to being able to listen to it at a single volume. And the more you move away from this approach, which is tiny speaker, compact error correction amplifier, so you move away to bigger speakers and amplifiers that use less and less error correction, then you will be able to listen to music at a more diverse volumes. So you can turn the volume down and it will be still enjoyable. The power will be still present in the music. Or you can play it louder and it will be still not fatiguing yet. So if that is your goal, then now you know where you have to go. But when you go for equipment that measure extremely well, then most likely 99% probability is that it's going to chase you down a street where you are tethered to a single volume, which is you have to always play it very loud and then it will sound powerful and fantastic. But if you want to play it quietly, it's rubbish, it collapses. Or if you want to push even louder, it's fatiguing already. So I think that's probably the ultimate distillation of measurements, distortion, how the gear, how the amplifiers and loudspeakers contribute to it. Of course, we could expand it to a much bigger area, and I try to add more and more to the story, but in half hour, I think that's what I cram into in a reasonable manner. So thank you for standing by, listening, and thank you all who support through Buy Me a Coffee. Huge shout out for Gerald, and have an awesome day. Bye bye.